Hello everyone, it's wonderful to be here. I'm going to be speaking in my personal capacity about my experiences at Lentegeur Hospital, a huge psychiatric institution in Mitchell's Plain on the Cape Flats outside of Cape Town, a so-called malhuis in a ghetto. When I grew up, I believed that mental illness was something rare, incredibly uncommon, because in so-called normal society, we don't really speak about mental illness, except in whispers. So it's easy to think that it doesn't exist. That way we can pretend that we're all just so happy, that everything is absolutely fine, that life's normal, that there's nothing to question and doubt about the way we're living and what we're doing to this planet. But then, when I became a psychiatrist, and one day I'll figure out how to use these, something strange began to happen, because suddenly everyone wanted to talk to me about their mental illness, as long as no one was listening. And I began to learn the truth. According to the study done in 2003, before the amphetamine epidemic, more than 30% of South Africans would suffer from a common mental disorder in their lifetime. And since then, the figures have been growing and growing. Drug dependence is getting much more common and infecting younger and younger people. And by 2050, the single biggest cause of workdays lost due to disability will be due to depression. And yet, we don't talk about it, and there are no resources to help the mentally ill. And even if there were, people with mental illness don't tend to come forward and ask for help until they're totally desperate. Why is that? Because they're ashamed to be the ill, unfortunate victims of this harsh, unforgiving society that we have become. And of course there's no money for the treatment of mental illness, because what politician is going to get elected on a campaign to raise funds for those crazy people that we pretend are not us, that we pretend do not exist? Of course not. So there's no money for it either. And such was the context of my first 5 years of work at Lentegeur Hospital, this huge institution in the middle of Mitchell's Plain. These institutions have a long history that the philosopher Michel Foucault says dates back to the European Enlightenment and the age of rational man, of this obsession with reason, when the so-called unreasonable had to be banished from society and hidden away in these big warehouses of the doom. And we see echoes of that in movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Shutter Island, and in the prison-like setting that is Lentegeur Hospital. Hardly a place of care. It looks more like a prison, barren buildings in barren grounds behind barbed wire and concrete fences. And the people of Mitchell's Plain have ironically also been removed, torn from the vibrant society that was Cape Town as racial rejects, and thrown out onto the flats, where they still live today. And Mitchell's Plain still bears the scars of that removal in a fragmented society that's torn apart by violence, poverty, drugs, and gangsterism. You see, if you lose your sense of heritage, if you lose your pride, it's easy to believe that happiness is something you see on a TV screen and sell out your own neighborhood and destroy your own environment in the belief that happiness is somewhere else. And then there's climate change, which we sometimes think of as a kind of fashionable thing, a concern of the rich. But what the survey showed was that an alarming number of people suffer hunger in our country every single day. And with major climate events, this is getting worse and worse, and people are getting driven into cities like Cape Town in search for jobs and food and hunger. This is leading to more and more pressure, and of course the ugly rise of xenophobia. So such was my first 5 years of work at Lentegeur Hospital. Always understaffed, always under pressure to turf out some poor soul back into the community to make space for the next one. And of course they come back and again and again and again. Each time even more broken by their failure to make a life amidst the harsh environment of our society. Humbled by the people I work with, the incredibly dedicated nurses who devote their lives to looking after the mentally ill. I worked as harder than I knew I could, and I struggled and fought to make this a better place. But eventually, I found that I was fighting everybody, and my world became incredibly dark as this bitterness welled up inside me until I knew I could fight no more. And eventually, I wrote my resignation letter and took it to my boss. But he refused to accept it, and he suggested I take a bit of time off, and so I did. And I was lucky enough to go on an 8-month road trip around southern and central Africa with my family. What a beautiful time. The amazing thing about such adventures is that they instill such a sense of self-belief. At first, the destination seems so far away and like such distant, impossible dreams. But slowly, kilometer by kilometer, you suddenly find that those dreams become real. And so, restored once again, I returned to work, and in the warm welcome when I arrived, I realized what had kept me there in the first place, and I wanted to really stay. But I knew that something would have to change if I was to survive this time. And around this time, I became aware of the most wonderful movement in mental health that's been sweeping the world. Called the recovery philosophy, this movement has shown that even people with the most severe of mental illnesses can reclaim their lives, can find a place and a role in society. The recovery philosophy focuses on the whole person and the whole environment and emphasizes their strengths. And it says that, well, what mentally ill people are looking for is actually what we're all looking for, a role and a place in a meaningful existence in life, whatever our circumstances. And to achieve that, we need real human empowerment, a real sense of connection, and above all, a sense of hope. And so I began to think, what if we could create such a place at Lentegeur Hospital? What if this pit of rejection amongst the rejected could suddenly be a source of inspiration and hope? And then I saw it in the name, a name that had been given with apartheid's sick irony, this wonderful gift of a metaphor, Lentegeur, the aroma or the smell of spring. And so began this wonderful dream of the Lentegeur Spring Project. Spring is a time of growth, of rebirth, of healing over the old wounds of winter, of getting in touch with our roots and blossoming forth to welcome the sun and the warmth of summer. It's a time of healing, of celebration and of joy. And that is what we try to do in the Lentegeur Spring Project, to bring this metaphor alive, to green everything we do at the hospital, to change the way we look and what we do and the very essence of what we are as a place of healing, recognizing that all of this is interconnected, the destruction of our societies, the loss of pride, and the disconnection between one another, the disconnection from our heritage, and from disconnection from the very soil from which we arise. So the aims of the Spring Project are multiple. To green the hospital in as many ways as possible, to bring forward a concept of environmental health, to let nature in creating beautiful gardens and psychosocial rehabilitation projects that involve food gardening, recycling, and connection with our cultural heritage, so that people are able to leave our hospital not with stigma, but with a sense of hope and pride in our heritage as being part of this beautiful continent that is Africa. And so this dream has taken wings, and slowly it's growing from strength to strength. Suddenly beautiful gardens are emerging everywhere. We've developed a lovely partnership with the Department of Agriculture that is allowing some of our longer-term patients to develop their own urban farming cooperative. We're growing vegetable gardens in the child and family unit, teaching children to grow things from an early age. This quote from a parent just blew me away at the level of deprivation that we seem to be facing. We've had tree planting days. Isn't that a wonderful bit of media exposure, so different from Psycho Killer Escapes the Madhouse. These t-shirts, one of which I'm wearing, we're selling to raise funds for the project and at the same time challenging stigmatization and asking serious questions about the nature of the society we have become. And so the dream goes on and on. We're developing a cultural festival to celebrate our culture. We've become a provincial flagship project. We're building an environmental resource center, and we've developed a beautiful landscape master plan, creating a vision of what we hope to become. And for me, I can only express profound gratitude at the wonderful change that's happened in my own life, this transformation from a daily struggle with despair and defeat to a wonderful dance of hope. And I dream of working at this hospital for years and years to come as I see the spring burst forth and flow out into the communities that surround us, as this place of despair becomes a wonderful source of inspiration and hope to everyone around. Bring back the spring. Bring die lente terug. Boeise en kwasaklobo. Thank you very much.